Welcome to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share.
Well, and welcome everybody to this month's edition of the Calibration Point Podcast. And as promised, today is a session we're going to explore with Senator John Crane, who's been a guest now on this leadership approach that you take, also the founder of JBC Leadership Strategies and Consulting. And we've spent now a couple of episodes talking about this process of why, where, who, and how in leadership, something, John, that you focus on, that you implement with leaders, globally. And so today, as we were thinking about how we wanted to put a bow on this, what we want to do for our audience is just explore, okay, we've been through some great content. We've hit each one individually as part of an equation. Now let's really go back to just grassroots. Like, I'm a frontline leader and I want to take this and implement it. How do I start to put this in place as a system or a process? What does that look like? Do I need a partner to listen to this series with me and start to talk about it? Obviously, people can contact you directly and get personal coaching and guidance as well. Yeah, let's just explore, what do you find becomes the best way to land the plane?
Yeah, well, Jamie, it's great to be back with you. This has been a really fun journey as we've walked through this whole sequence. And now, as you say, we're kind of landing the plane into the practical, right? Because it's very easy. And I tend to be this kind of guy too. Like, I'm an ideas guy. I like batting around different thoughts and concepts. And that's really important. But it loses value if you cannot translate a good idea into real world application. And so that's where we want to go with this for those leaders out there who are leading different organizations, businesses, churches, nonprofits, whatever it is, that there is, their particular leadership context. And
Right.
So as we've outlined, this why, where, who, and how, we'll put it together because I'm kind of a systematic thinker, right? So start in one direction and kind of move to the other, kind of an upstream to downstream concept, where upstream are some of the bigger, more philosophical, existential type questions, and then downstream are the priorities, principles, and practices, and how you kind of play those things out. So as you think about this in the context of your particular environment, I know that the audience that typically is listening to your podcast here runs the gamut, right?
Right.
You've got some organizations that are very, very large, and then you got some other organizations that are pretty small, kind of a mom and pop
Right.
shop. And all of this process still works no matter what the scale is of the organization you're in. But the difference right out of the gate that we have to acknowledge is the smaller shops, the leaders are wearing many more hats, right? Because
Right.
there's less people to delegate to.
Right.
And so I've been there. I am there in different ways, even now. And that's just one of those real world challenges is you hear something like this, maybe you've got audience members that have listened to this entire series and they're like, well, that all sounds good, but I've only got me and my assistant, or whatever their particular environment is. And so one of the things that I would first say out of the gate in terms of how we approach this is resist, the urge to feel overwhelmed, right? Take one step, do one thing, start at least at one point. And to me, my starting point for my own journey and the one that I encourage leaders on is the why, right? And this is something that you have to wrestle with. As we said in the episode where we talked about that, you have to wrestle with that for yourself in order to then be able to convey that to your team. If your
Right.
team is small or large, they still need to have a clear understanding of the why. So I was at a speaking engagement last night in Wabash, Indiana, and the gentleman that hosted me was a former Senate colleague of mine, Andy Zay. he brought in a young guy that does national speaking in the political space, and he's coming from a conservative perspective, and so it generates some level of controversy because people are resistant to some of those ideas. This young guy's he's in his freshman year in college,
Oh, wow.
and he's already getting threats, death threats. It's a serious
Wow.
business, and he knew that going into it, right? They interviewed him. He gave kind of a talk, and I was part of the event. I gave one of the opening talks, but he was the main event. And then they had a conversation with him, and that was one of the questions that Senator Zay asked him, is what is your why? And because you've chosen a hard path. You've decided that you're going to pursue this career vocational path. What's the thing that drives you every day? Well, it's the same question that every single one of us has to ask. What is it that drives me every day? What is it that
Right.
drives my team? And so we talked about that. Now, practically speaking, here's the other thing that we have to resist. And this is part of the human condition. We have to resist the tyranny of the urgent, right? Not that we have to completely dismiss all the things that are present on the front burner of our leadership context. There's all kinds of stuff popping up, or fires that have to be put out and all that stuff. So we do need to deal with that. But in order to step back and wrestle with big issues like the why, the purpose, we talked about, my contextual why versus my ultimate why, why am I here on the planet? In order to do that, we have to consciously and scheduling step away and put ourselves in an environment for reflection. And that's tough, right? Because you got all these things. I struggle with this. I don't give myself permission to actually say, hey, if I stepped away for a couple days of personal reflection and really just, getting a notepad, jotting some things down, really beginning to process, for me as a person of faith, beginning to pray and say, what should I be doing with my life, or what should we be doing at this season of our organization? You got to take that time to do that, because you can't get it done with all the white noise of just the chaos of leadership that is just part of the rhythm of everybody's normal life. And so that's the first step. You got to resist the tyranny of the urgent, deal with that, or set your schedule in such a way that you're like, 2 months from now, we're going to actually step away for a couple of days. We're going to go deep. We're going to figure this piece out, because that's the engine that drives everything else. So that to me is one of the first steps that you got to take on just kind of setting the direction of where you're trying to get to.
So let's talk about that. How do you anticipate that could work with, say, a small nonprofit and, a board? I mean, do you use, or do you see where a board member can become that leadership partner with, say, an executive director and be there as a support, a partner, leadership? I don't want to say accountability because that's the wrong word, but I mean, truly just a partner.
Sounding board. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounding board. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think, to me, I get value in setting aside time myself, but I also get, and to me, I'm a verbal processor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I get a lot more value even if there's just one other person there. And usually,
Right.
usually it's my poor wife. We'll be in the car and be like, hey, can I run something past you? And then I talk for 45 minutes. She's a counselor, by the way, so she's very good at listening, but it's just, I need to be able to verbally process that, or maybe she'll pose something, or whoever it is I'm talking to will pose something. Or maybe I'm listening to a podcast on a topic that is related to what I'm trying to process, and that speaker or that conversation kind of illuminates a little idea that's like, okay, that helps me kind of lock in on what I'm trying to figure out. So stepping away is the first piece, and then beginning to ask yourself the big questions, right? Like, why am I here on the planet? If I could do anything and I knew I wouldn't fail, what would I try to do? If I were running my business, would I hire me to run it? Like those kinds of things where we can kind of give ourselves a little distance and begin to reflect on where we're at, right? So we've got to take the time to do that. And if you have somebody that can be part of that process, I think there's value in that. I would say ideally, I would set up one of those, separated kind of week, couple days away, or a little mini sabbatical where you've got some time for yourself.
Yep.
And then you've got some time for processing with one or two or more key people that can help you begin to think those things through and work that process to its end, right? The other thing that we tend to do sometimes is we'll get 80% or 85% of the way through the process and almost land the plane. And then we've run out of time or something else is pressing. And then we have to get back into the normal, rhythm of life that's busy.
Yep.
And we never quite got there, right? So pressing into that and saying, we're going to push that all the way through. Okay. So that to me is where I would start. But then the why leads to the where, right? So the why,
Right.
if we think about it, it's the idea of purpose. The where is direction. So if I know why I'm doing the things, now it's okay, where are we going? And as we
Yep.
said in that particular episode, if we aren't clear about where we're going, then all of the other stuff that we're doing just becomes activity, right?
Right.
And activity doesn't automatically assume accomplishment.
Yep.
So how do we figure that out? Well, I would sit down with myself, my team, whoever it is that is part of that kind of a key group, and begin to map out some aspirational goals. Like kind of let's do an assessment of where we are, understanding what we're trying to do with our business or our nonprofit or our organization. Where are our current goals? Or maybe we already had set some at the beginning of the year and we got to check in. How are we doing? Are we still on track with that? And set a regular rhythm where you're revisiting those so that if you are, if 6 months ago you got off by 1 to 5 degrees, and you didn't check in regularly, by the time you realize it, it's like taking a slight wrong turn. It's like missing the
Yep.
exit. I was supposed to get off on this exit, and now I have to drive 10 miles out of my way, right, to get off on the next exit, circle back, and get back on track to where I'm going. Versus having caught that a quarter of a mile before the exit and
Yep.
then catching that kind of concept, right? But sitting down with your team and mapping out, where are we at with the goals that we set?
Yep.
What adjustments do we need to make? What, we're now moving to, we're beginning to look at the next year, 2026. It's like, okay, what are the things that we can already begin to be thinking about in light of where we are and where we're trying to go?
Ready to go.
But
Yep.
all of that is based on the where. It's based on that directional piece, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
And then, of
And
course, go ahead.
well, it seems that no, actually finish your setting the table with it. And then I want to ask a conclusive question. So keep going.
Okay. So then, of course, that leads us to the who. And I wouldn't, if people haven't heard that episode, go back and listen to it. The way I differentiate it is there's two particular groups of people or people involved in that. One is yourself, right, is part of the who, and the other is the people you're trying to lead. So an important, super important concept is we cannot, lead others well if we aren't leading ourselves well.
Right.
This is a concept that I share with leaders all over the world, but it's also one that I just talked to my 17-year-old high school junior daughter about, who is an athlete and a team captain. And so trying to encourage her on what does it mean to be a leader on your team? Well, you got to set the pace, right? If you're doing physical conditioning, you got to be leading in that, not bringing up the tail. And so the idea of leading yourself, well, we understand it in theory, and yet we all struggle with it, right? I struggle with it. We all do. It's just, that's the nature of life. And continuing to get up every day, driven by these very things we just talked about, our own why, our own direction. Where are we trying to go in life? What are the goals we're trying to set? Why are we trying to set those? Well, because I'm trying to accomplish these things with my life on the planet, right? For whatever years I have. And so, what are the disciplines that I need to have? And that's where the practical outworking of that is to begin to work through an assessment on those key areas of your life. Your physical life, your mental, emotional, your spiritual, your financial, your relational, all the stuff. And if you have, listeners that want help with that, we've got an assessment tool that is simple, nothing complicated, but can help them do a check-in on that so that they can begin to check your dashboard is kind of how we talk about it, right? Is
Yep.
looking at the dashboard of your car and checking your gauges, making sure everything's good. 9 out of 10 might be great. The 10th one is way out of whack and it's going to affect everything else, right? So that's the first group. And then the second group is your people.
Right.
And one of the driving things, I use this in the Senate all the time, because as you know, in politics, people get like just all out of sorts. And we set up this kind of us versus them, we and they. And of course, we and us are always the good guys, and they and them are always the bad guys. And it doesn't matter which team you're on, right? We and us are always the good guys. Well, it creates this real oppositional approach.
Yep.
And that doesn't help anybody, right? So one of the things that I have talked about in the political space is putting down the pitchforks and torches and embracing what I call golden rule diplomacy. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Well, that extends way beyond politics. That's actually a core leadership principle. So if you think about, if you are the head of your organization, right, as a senator, as a CEO, as the captain, as the lead pastor, whatever your particular role is, don't ever forget to treat people the way you would want to be treated. So from top to bottom, your team needs to feel like you care,
Right.
not just driven by reaching whatever the next goal is, as important as that is. Do they care about you? Do they care about your role in the team? Do they care about what's happening in your life outside of your work? Because like it or not, we bring that stuff into our workplace, right?
Yep.
So do we care about the people that we are leading? And it's important for us to be thinking about, what was it like when I was in that role, right? And if I can continue to remember that, then how can I try to do it even better so that my people know that I really care about them? And then they'll go through a wall for you, right?
Right.
They'll help, you get to the next level because they want to be a part of what you're doing. The other key thing in that is, am I a good communicator? And it's easy for us to talk about this and assume that when I say something out of my mouth, it is absolutely as crystal clear as it was in my head, right? Like, oh, it's brilliant in my head. And then, of course, I assume it's equally brilliant coming out of my mouth and equally clear, and it's not. And so many points of contention come from miscommunication or assumptions that we didn't clearly communicate. We just assumed that they knew X, Y, Z, whatever it was.
Yep.
So making sure that we're clear both directions, that we are clear in terms of things we are communicating, but there are also clear channels of things that are being communicated up to me so that we are all on the same page. And so I would do an assessment on that, right? Like, maybe it's focus groups. Maybe it's finding some key people that'll give you honest feedback, because that's always hard too, right? We know that honest feedback is important, but we're happy to give it sometimes. We just never want to receive it, like where we're falling short. So making sure that that's clear. And then, of course, that kind of leads into the how. And the how, becomes the practices and priorities of how we, do the real practical, pragmatic things of leadership. So, what are our rhythms in our workplace? What are our expectations of people? Are they very clear about that? Do our people have a sense of how their job fits within the larger, mission of what we're trying to do? As we said earlier, the communication piece, where are there breakdowns? How can we improve that? If we have folks in our organization that need a particular skill set and maybe they don't quite have it, do we have people internally or do we have resources to be able to help them get what they need there? AI is another huge space that is emerging. So the practical pieces of that, are we implementing tools that can help us, but also implementing them in an ethically responsible way? All those kinds of practical things that become part of the leadership context. And the how, the priorities and practices is all downstream from all of these upstream concepts, the why, the where, and the who. And so that's where, that's the day to day. Another one there is your process. What are the process that we have internally? Are people clear about that? If there's a breakdown in the process, then what do we need to do to address it? Those kinds of things.
Yep. So it seems, and I'd just be curious to your thoughts on this, that this could be an interesting, for lack of better words, part of a performance evaluation process that was less tactical and transactional with a leader, but one that was focused more on, let's find your power alley and let's build the role around your strengths, and let me help you as how we're going to invest in you to develop that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, probably back in the 90s, Willow Creek Church was still is a mega church, but one of the big things that they were pushing was giftedness, right? So in the spiritual context, are we using our gifts and talents and abilities? And love it. That's a great concept. The leadership component of that was kind of popularized by Jim Collins on Good to Great, right? Getting the right people on the bus, getting them in the right seats, Well, all of that assumes that we have a pretty clear understanding of what the gifts and abilities and experiences are of the different people on our team. And obviously we can all learn to interview well, right? And so there might be some things that are obvious in an interview, and then some other things that on the positive side, we didn't even realize they brought that to the team. And that's a great thing that we can begin to leverage. We also may realize, and this is more common, that there were some shortcomings that didn't quite come out at the interview. And all of a sudden, they're in a position that isn't the best fit for them because we didn't realize, this was something that, they may have talked a good game in the interview, but they actually are not well suited for that. So I think of my own life, right? I had the opportunity, or I got a letter from somebody that I greatly respected, high profile national leader, who said, and this was when I think I was in my late 20s, early 30s. He said, I was looking for an assistant who might be able to help me, and your name came to mind. I still have that letter because it was like, this is amazing. This guy thought of me, Well, as I got older and more experienced, I realized I would have absolutely been horrible in that particular role as an executive assistant for a high-profile leader. Like, I like the idea of it. I would have loved to have been kind of living in his shadow and learning by osmosis. But the actual job, I would have probably been fired pretty fast because it wasn't my skill set, right? But I can interview really well. I would have faked my way into that if they'd asked me, right? And so you get what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
That's where all of a sudden you make the hire, and then you wake up one day and go, why the heck did I hire this person? Or why did I hire them for this particular role? Right? Now, if they still have some value to add, that's great. And if we've got the ability to make an adjustment, it's going to benefit all of us if we work through that kind of growing pains adjustment process and actually reposition them into something that is a better fit. And then they will discover that the experience, the experience is much better for them as well, right? And so that's where we got to understand those different roles that we need in our company or our organization. That's why the why, the direction, some of those things are really important. We also have to understand our people, the who, and know who do we have, what skill sets do they bring, what gaps do we still need to fill in the smaller organizations. I just told a guy last night, because he's kind of that guy, he wears all the hats, and I said, yeah, you got to be careful walking through doorways, right? Because you got so many hats on your head, they're going to get knocked off going through a low door. And that's that's the challenge of the small shops is how do I do that? And how do we build enough revenue and resources to then be able to hire the next person And do I understand what is the most strategic set of skills that we need for this next season? It's a difficult journey. If you take the time to actually work through that, you can find benefit long term. It's just then you get back to the tyranny of the urgent and who's got time and all that. So it becomes this cycle where you've got to give yourself permission to step away at the beginning, do that good deep work, and then also give yourself permission to, work through the process as you go from the why, the where, the who, into the how, to actually see the successful outworking of that in your organization.
So, and I think you're validating then why having a partner would be so important and
Absolutely.
would be a great role for a board member.
That's right. And the right board member, ideally should be one that not only gets what you're trying to do, but has some experience in having worked through those kinds of things with, other organizations or even in their own life and that kind of thing. And, that's what we try to help different leaders and organizations do too, is walk them through that process so that they can begin to actually see some meaningful value.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And again, for everybody, they can always contact you directly if they need a coach and or a coach to help their own coach process through this and equipping someone else. So I think though we always need partners, and we're always looking for meaningful partnerships, especially for executive directors with their board. And it seems that this approach would not only be beneficial for anyone, but also could be a really effective strategy for an executive director in looking for new ways to partner with their board.
And I'll make one comment on that too, because I've actually paid to get some coaching myself on some key things that I needed some help with. And once I got the coaching, it actually gave me some game changer ideas that I've implemented that have been very successful. And they're these kinds of ideas that once you get it, it's simple enough. You go, now, why didn't I think of that? And why did I pay all that money to actually have somebody else tell me something that theoretically I should have been able to tell myself?
Right.
Theoretically, I should have been able to tell myself. But the value that I've learned is there is something interesting about that third-party perspective who doesn't have any vested interest, doesn't have any history, doesn't have the back and forth of all the different craziness that happens in the growth of organizations and, all these different things, and just kind of can analyze it from a more kind of removed, objective standpoint, and then ask good questions. And that's what brought the ideas from percolating way back in my mind somewhere to the front of mind where you go, that was a good idea, right?
Right.
But if you have somebody that can really begin to ask good questions, you will actually discover that the best people who can take you through that don't give you the answers. They just ask good questions and you end up giving yourself the best answer. Right? And so that's where that value of having a board member or somebody else that can help you kind of bounce those ideas back and forth, can be a sounding board, somebody who's got some wisdom, some experience. I know for me that has been invaluable every time I've done that, either in a formal paid context or more often in a informal, I need a mentoring voice in my in my ear for this particular season on something I'm wrestling with.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. That's excellent. And I think a good way to put a bow on this and kind of wrap this together so people can see, again, that it applies internally, externally, in partnerships, and for any role as far as that goes in any age within our organization. I know we'll have more fun stuff we'll get to explore together that will be a stepping stone off of this. So I think for everybody, they can look forward to having you on again. And as always, super appreciative of you getting to share this model, what you're doing, the impact it's having, and just get us thinking about new approaches that we can take in leadership development. So really appreciate that.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to doing the next one.
Thanks for listening to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.